The heavy mahogany door didn't just close behind me, it clicked shut with the absolute, chilling finality of a prison cell locking from the outside. You live here free, Evelyn. Hand over your savings, or find somewhere else to sleep. The words floated through the dim, suffocating air of the Manhattan brownstone like a slow-acting poison. Sitting across the polished oak dining table, the man delivering the ultimatum didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. This wasn't the boy I had raised, bled for, and guided through life. This was a stranger wearing a tailored suit, his knuckles white as he gripped his crystal water glass. Next to him, his wife, Sarah, sat frozen, meticulously poking at a cold piece of salmon on her plate. Her jaw was clenched tight, a subtle tell that she had not only rehearsed this brutal line with him, but likely scripted it herself. My name is Evelyn Tales. I am 68 years old, a widow of 5 years, and until that freezing Tuesday evening in New York, I believed I was living with family out of love. 18 months ago, after my husband passed, they persuaded me to sell my quiet, comfortable home in upstate New York and move into the ground-floor guest suite of their multi-million-dollar, Upper West Side townhouse. Sarah had painted a picture of domestic bliss, insisting that being close to my 2 young grandsons would heal my grieving heart. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply set my sterling silver fork down onto the cloth napkin and looked at the 2 of them. My son shifted uncomfortably under my silent gaze, clearly expecting a dramatic breakdown, a desperate plea from a vulnerable, elderly widow who had nowhere left to go. He believed I was trapped. He knew every single dollar that sat in my private high-yield bank account from the sale of my house. Is that right? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, cutting through the silence like a freshly honed blade. It's just practical, Mom, he muttered, finally glancing up for a fraction of a second before looking away toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked courtyard. The mortgage on this property is astronomical, and inflation is crushing us. You have a fortune just sitting there doing nothing in a high-yield account. It's only fair you contribute a massive lump sum if you're going to take up prime space in our home. I see. I picked up my napkin, folded it into a flawless square, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I didn't list the thousands of dollars I quietly bled into their household every month. I didn't remind them of the reality of our living arrangement. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping softly against the hardwood, and stood up straight. I'll think carefully about what you've said, I replied softly. I turned and walked down the dimly lit hallway toward my suite, shutting the double doors behind me. The moment the lock turned, the illusion shattered. My time in this house was over, but I wasn't going to leave quietly. I was going to dismantle their illusion piece by piece. The next morning, the Manhattan sky was a pale, bruised gray. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the muted morning light filtering through the heavy drapes. You live here free. The phrase repeated in my mind, fascinating in its sheer delusion. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking application, and began scrolling back through my transaction history over the past 18 months. True, I didn't write a check with the word rent spelled out in the memo line, but the proof was right there in black and white digital ink. I paid for the luxury organic groceries from Dean and DeLuca every single week, an easy $1,200 a month. When Sarah complained that winter heating bills for a 4-story brownstone were unmanageable, I quietly linked my credit card to the Con Edison utility account. I paid the annual dues for my grandson's elite private soccer academy, bought their designer winter coats, and routinely filled Sarah's Land Rover with gas whenever I took it to run their endless list of errands. I wasn't a guest living on charity. I was a silent, unappreciated ATM, operating so seamlessly in the background that they had convinced themselves they were supporting me. By Wednesday afternoon, the psychological game began. Wednesdays were traditionally my grocery day, where I would take Sarah's meticulously curated list and restock their sprawling pantry. Instead of grabbing my coat and handbag, I brewed a cup of Earl Grey tea, wrapped myself in a cashmere shawl, and sat out on the private terrace with a crisp novel. Around noon, Sarah swept into the kitchen in her head-to-toe designer workout gear, smelling of expensive perfume and sweat. She pulled open the Sub-Zero refrigerator, stared inside, and let out a sharp, theatrical sigh. "Evelyn, didn't you make the run to the market today?" she demanded, a sharp, entitled edge cutting through her tone. "No, I didn't," I replied smoothly, not taking my eyes off the printed page. She crossed her arms, stepping out onto the terrace, her designer sneakers squeaking against the stone. "Well, what are the boys supposed to eat for dinner?" "There's literally nothing in the pantry except condiments and sparkling water. I'm sure an intelligent woman like you will figure something out," I said, offering a serene smile as I turned the page. Sarah stared at me, her mouth opening slightly in shock. In 18 months, I had never once refused a task or spoken with anything less than total compliance. "I don't have time to shop today," she hissed, her voice tight with anger. "I have a private Pilates reformer session in Soho at 1, and then I have to get my nails retouched in Tribeca." "That sounds like an extraordinarily demanding afternoon," I murmured softly. "Drive safely." She huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed out of the suite, slamming the heavy kitchen door behind her. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot tea. The invisible checkbook was officially closed. If they truly believed I lived here for free, it was time to show them what living for free actually looked like. By Friday evening, the atmosphere inside the brownstone was toxic. Sarah had been forced to order high-end delivery for 3 consecutive nights, making an aggressive show of sighing every time she tapped her Apple Pay on her phone. I paid no attention, quietly eating a simple, fresh salad I had bought with my own cash from a local bistro, keeping entirely to myself. That afternoon, while they were out, I logged into my laptop and accessed the digital management portals for the property's utilities and high-speed fiber internet. Months ago, my son had complained about a missed payment warning that threatened his home office setup. I had stepped in quietly, putting my personal checking account on automatic withdrawal to ensure the lights, heat, and gigabit internet never flickered. With 3 deliberate clicks, I removed my bank account details, deleted my primary credit card from the profiles, and canceled the auto-pay authorization. At 8 o'clock that evening, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. My son knocked sharply on my door before pushing it open without waiting for an answer. He stood in the doorway, holding his smartphone, his face pale with rising anxiety. "Mom, I just got an automated emergency notification from Con Ed and the internet provider," he said, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed tightly. "It says the primary auto payment method was removed, and the accounts are past due." "Did you mess with the settings?" "I removed my financial information," I answered simply, continuing to fold a silk scarf and placing it neatly inside a leather travel bag on my bed. He stared at the bag, then back at my face, his brows furrowing in frustration. "Why would you do that?" "Now I have to go through the hassle of logging in and setting up corporate billing details." "Because it's your house," I replied softly, meeting his gaze. "You should be the person paying for the power and high-speed infrastructure you consume." "You live here too," he snapped, his voice jumping an octave as his composure began to crack. "I do," I agreed calmly. "But as you made undeniably clear earlier this week, I live here for free. I wouldn't want to violate the strict rules of your household by paying your bills." He opened his mouth to deliver a sharp retort, but the logic backed him directly into a corner. He couldn't force me to pay the utility bills without admitting that his entire demand for my life savings was an act of pure extortion. His neck flushed a mottled, furious red. "Fine," he snarled, slamming his hand against the doorframe. "Play your childish games, but we still need that lump sum transfer settled. The private wealth bankers at the firm need proof of funds by the end of the month. Don't push me, Evelyn." "Don't worry," I smiled gently, looking up at him. "You will have my absolute final answer long before your deadline." The following Monday morning, I didn't take the subway downtown. Instead, I boarded an early morning Amtrak train out of Penn Station, traveling south toward Philadelphia. I had spent the weekend making quiet phone calls. I had no interest in staying in New York, where every street corner held a memory of my late husband or the ungrateful family I was leaving behind. I wanted a fresh start, a place rich in history, quiet elegance, and absolute independence. I met an elite real estate broker named Marcus in a sunlit office in Society Hill, one of Philadelphia's most prestigious historical neighborhoods. "I brought 3 exceptional properties for you to inspect, Mrs. Tales," Marcus said, laying out sleek leather portfolios across his glass desk. "Before we tour them, are we looking at liquid asset verification for a private mortgage, or will we need a short contingency period?" "Cash," I stated without hesitation. "I am buying the property outright. No mortgages, no bank contingencies, no delays. I want a swift, completely silent closing." Marcus's eyes widened slightly in surprise before a professional smile swept across his face. "In that case, Mrs. Tales, you hold all the cards. We spent the afternoon touring pristine historic properties. The third property was breathtaking. A completely restored, 2-story brick townhome tucked away on a quiet, cobblestone street lined with gas lamps and ancient oak trees. It featured exposed brick walls, a modern chef's kitchen, a private walled garden in the back, and state-of-the-art security. It was private, secure, and entirely mine. I made a full-price cash offer on the spot. Because there were no institutional lenders involved on my end, Marcus assured me the closing process would be lightning fast, less than 2 weeks. While my new life was quietly falling into place in Pennsylvania, the brownstone in Manhattan was rapidly deteriorating beneath the surface. Without my invisible financial padding absorbing their day-to-day operational costs, the reality of my son's wildly inflated lifestyle was crashing down around them. Standing near the stairwell late on Wednesday night, I overheard their panicked whispers radiating from the primary kitchen upstairs. "A $1,200 transaction at the salon," my son's voice hissed through the dark. "Sarah, we don't have liquid capital sitting in the operational account right now. We wouldn't be in a liquidity squeeze if your arrogant mother had just transferred her savings like she was supposed to." She shot back, her voice laced with venom. "She's sitting down there on a goldmine while we drown." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, listening to them tear each other apart. A faint, lingering sadness touched my heart, not for myself, but for the man my son had allowed himself to become. He had traded his integrity, his dignity, and his relationship with his mother for a hollow status symbol he couldn't afford. The true motive behind his aggressive demand had become clear to me days ago, after I spotted an open letter from a financial institution resting on the front hall table. He had financed the Manhattan brownstone using a high-risk, variable-rate mortgage, gambling that interest rates would drop before his adjustment period expired. Instead, market rates had skyrocketed. His monthly payment was about to double, and he lacked the equity required to refinance into a fixed-rate loan. He didn't want to invest my life savings. He needed a massive cash injection to pay down the principal balance so the underwriters wouldn't foreclose on his precarious life. My hard-earned legacy was meant to be his financial life raft. On Thursday morning, my son cornered me in the lower hallway while I was pouring myself a bottle of water. "Look, Mom," he began, adopting a smooth, corporate tone he usually reserved for his high-net-worth clients. "I know tempers flared the other night, but you have to look at this objectively from a family perspective. We are offering you primary residency in a prime Manhattan location. The least you can do is help us stabilize the family estate." "Stabilize the estate," I repeated, setting my water down. "Yes," he continued rapidly, leaning in close. "If we deploy $150,000 from your reserves onto the principal balance, our debt-to-income ratio adjusts immediately. The refinancing clears underwriting, our monthly obligation drops by $4,000, and everyone wins. It's an investment in your family's future. An investment implies ownership and a financial return," I noted coolly. "My name is nowhere on the title deed of this brownstone. You are asking me to gift you my entire life savings for a property I have zero legal rights to. Sarah stepped down the stairs, glaring down at me over the banister. "We are family, Evelyn. You shouldn't need legal contracts and title deeds to rescue your own son. You're being unfathomably selfish." I looked up at Sarah, taking in her immaculate blow-dry, designer jewelry, and cold eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attempt to defend my character. "I understand your true positions with crystal clarity," I told them calmly. My son let out a visible sigh of relief, completely misinterpreting my composure for absolute surrender. "So you'll initiate the wire transfer to the escrow account. Everything will be completely settled very soon," I promised softly, picking up my water bottle and stepping past them before they could press for another detail. My phone vibrated in my pocket the moment I reached my room. It was Marcus from Philadelphia. The seller had officially signed the cash purchase agreement. The closing date was set, finalized, and immutable. Packing up a lifetime of memories inside a house that feels like a battleground should be painful, but for me, it became an act of profound liberation. I didn't attempt to hide my preparations. I quietly brought sturdy moving boxes through the side entrance late at night. I carefully packed my late husband's rarest vintage books, my personal photo albums, my private legal records, and the heirloom silver passed down through generations of my family. My son and his wife were so utterly consumed by their escalating financial panic that they barely paid attention to my movements. When Sarah accidentally stumbled upon a stack of sealed cardboard boxes tucked into the corner of my suite, she merely smirked. Finally decluttering, she sneered, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of wine. "Good. David wants to turn this space into a private home gym once we clear up the bank paperwork." "Just organizing my belongings," I answered with a calm, practiced smile. She didn't inquire further. She didn't bother reading the destination labels I had meticulously affixed to the sides of each box. Over the next several days, I quietly loaded the smaller, high-value boxes into the trunk of a rented sedan and drove them to a secure storage facility near the interstate. Piece by piece, item by item, I was systematically erasing my existence from their home. The atmosphere upstairs descended into utter chaos. My son paced the hardwood floors deep into the night, screaming hushed arguments into his cell phone with underwriting supervisors and private equity brokers. Sarah snapped constantly at the children, her anger radiating through the floorboards. They were waiting for me to break. They believed my silence was the tragic, hopeless resignation of an elderly woman who realized she had no choices left. They assumed I would ultimately surrender my financial sovereignty in exchange for the illusion of a family safety net. They failed to realize a fundamental truth: warmth that must be purchased isn't love, it's extortion, and I was done paying the bill. On Tuesday afternoon, I quietly slipped away to a private legal office in Midtown Manhattan and executed the final closing documents via encrypted digital transfer. The Philadelphia historical townhome was officially mine. The keys were resting safely in my leather handbag. Thursday evening arrived, and my son decided he was done waiting for me to yield. He strode into my sitting room where I was quietly reading and stood directly between my armchair and the light, blocking my view. His face was drawn, dark circles lingering beneath his eyes. "Tomorrow is Friday, Evelyn," he announced, his voice cold, harsh, and uncompromising. "The Wealth Management Division requires verified proof of the wire transfer by 5 o'clock sharply. Have you authorized the transaction from your central account?" I slowly closed my book, rested it on my lap, and looked directly into his eyes. "No," I replied smoothly. "I have not." His face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "I am done playing these pathetic mind games with you. I laid out the terms of this house clearly. You live here free, or you help us preserve this home. If that money isn't cleared in our principal balance account by tomorrow afternoon, you will pack your bags and get out." "I mean every word." Sarah stepped into the room behind him, folding her arms across her chest like a silent, threatening shadow. "We are not going to allow you to parasite off our success any longer, Evelyn." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her statement almost made me laugh out loud. but I kept my facial expressions completely masked in ice. I looked at my son, searching his cold eyes for any remaining trace of the little boy I had held in my arms decades ago. There was nothing left, only a desperate, greedy man willing to destroy his own mother to keep his fragile lifestyle from collapsing around him. "I understand your deadline perfectly," I said, keeping my tone steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You have drawn your boundaries with extreme clarity. If the money isn't in your account by Friday, I must leave." "Exactly," he spat, turning on his heel. "So figure it out." I reopened my book, took a slow sip of tea, and continued reading. A wave of profound, weightless relief washed over my body. For 18 months, I had carried the invisible weight of their arrogance, their covert disdain, and their endless financial demands. Now, that weight was gone forever. My son had drawn a line in the sand, entirely ignorant of the fact that I was already standing miles away on the other side. Friday morning broke crisp, clear, and cold over Manhattan. My son and his wife departed the brownstone at precisely 7:30 in the morning, he heading to his corporate office to orchestrate desperate damage control, and she driving the children to their elite academy before heading to her fitness club. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't look back. They genuinely believed that by 5 o'clock, fear would force me onto my knees to execute the transfer. At 8 o'clock sharply, a massive white moving truck pulled up against the curb directly outside the brownstone. 4 professional, uniform-clad movers hopped out of the vehicle. Because I had already transported my personal, high-value belongings to storage, the operation was executed with military precision. They swept through my ground-floor suite, carefully lifting my solid wood bedroom set, my imported leather armchair, my antique desk, and the remaining sealed boxes. The entire removal took precisely 45 minutes. When the suite was completely stripped bare, I pulled a broom and cleaning supplies from my bag. I swept every inch of the hardwood floors, scrubbed the baseboards, and sanitized the private bathroom until it gleamed under the recessed lighting. I left the space far cleaner than it had been on the day I moved in. I was determined not to leave them with a single valid complaint. Before stepping through the front entrance for the final time, I pulled a plain, heavy white envelope from my handbag and placed it precisely in the center of their expensive, polished oak dining table. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream cardstock. I didn't write an emotional manifesto. I didn't waste ink attempting to make them feel remorse. Guilt requires a working conscience, and theirs had long since withered away. The note was brief, crisp, and absolute. "David, I took your advice. I kept my savings, and I found somewhere else to live. The guest suite is thoroughly cleaned and sanitized. Please place any misdirected mail in the post box. I have established a permanent mail forwarding order with the United States Postal Service." Evelyn Tales, I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me, hearing the metallic click of the deadbolt ring out through the quiet street. I dropped my set of duplicate house keys into the brass mailbox, stepped down the brownstone steps, and slid into the back seat of a waiting black town car. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, looking back at me through the rearview mirror. "Philadelphia," I replied, a soft smile finally breaking across my face. "Take the scenic route." The drive down the interstate was hypnotic and calm. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was unlocking the heavy iron gate of my new historical townhome in Society Hill. The silence inside the house was majestic. There was no unspoken resentment echoing through the hallways, no toxic passive aggression, no desperate demands for my money. I unpacked my favorite porcelain mugs, started the coffee maker, and sat down in my plush armchair near the tall front windows overlooking the cobblestone street. I took a deep, lingering breath, finally, completely at peace. At precisely 4:15 in the afternoon, my phone began to vibrate violently on the side table. The screen lit up with my son's name and caller ID. I set my coffee down, reached over, and slid the button to silence the call. 5 minutes later, Sarah's name flashed across the screen. I silenced her call as well. I wasn't hiding from them. I simply had nothing left to say to people who viewed me as a balance sheet item. At 5:30, my son called again. This time, I tapped the green button and raised the speaker to my ear without saying a word. "Where are you?" His voice was unhinged, frantic, and echoing violently, clearly broadcasting from the empty, hardwood floor of my former suite. "Where is all your furniture?" "Where did you go?" "I am at my new residence, David," I answered smoothly, my tone completely unbothered. "I followed your explicit instructions." "You gave me an absolute deadline, remember?" "Evelyn, you can't just pack up a moving truck and vanish," he screamed, his professional composure completely shattered. "The wealth management, underwriting team called 20 minutes ago. They reran our comprehensive debt-to-income and asset verification profiles. That sounds like a complex matter between you and your financial officers," I replied softly. "You don't get it," David's voice cracked, bordering on sheer panic. "When you abruptly stopped paying the $3,000 a month in groceries, utilities, and domestic expenses. We had to dump all those operational costs onto our primary credit lines this month. It flagged the automated underwriting system. Without your cash injection on the principal, our debt ratio is totally blown. They denied the fixed-rate refinance. Evelyn, they flat-out rejected the application." In the background, muffled through the receiver, I could clearly hear Sarah shrieking hysterical curses, accusing me of intentionally ruining their lives and destroying their social standing. They had constructed a massive, fragile house of cards, relying entirely on my silent, unacknowledged financial subsidies to maintain a lifestyle they could never truly afford. By pulling my support out from under them, I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply allowed the cold, unyielding reality of their own financial deceit to be exposed to the world. "I'm sorry to hear your application was denied, David," I said gently, and in a strange way, I meant it. I hadn't set out to destroy him, but I refused to burn myself alive to keep him warm. "You have to come back right now," he begged, his tone instantly shifting from rage to pathetic desperation. "We can renegotiate everything. We can draft a formal tenancy agreement. Just bring the funds back." "No, David," I replied softly, my voice filled with unshakable finality. "I don't live anywhere for free, and I am keeping my savings. Good luck with the house." I ended the call, tapped the settings on my phone, and blocked both of their numbers for the remainder of the weekend. Weeks turned into months, and life inside my Society Hill townhome blossomed into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. I joined a local historical preservation society, reunited with old university friends living in Pennsylvania, and spent my mornings tending to the winter blooms in my private walled garden. I was finally living completely on my own terms, surrounded by dignity, peace, and genuine self-respect. Eventually, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I unblocked my son's phone number. An hour later, he called. His voice was subdued, hollowed out by exhaustion and heavy reality. The arrogant corporate bully was gone, replaced by a weary man who had been forced to face the consequences of his actions. "We put Sarah's Land Rover up for sale on consignment," he told me quietly, his tone flat. "We're liquidating our private investments and restructuring our debt to keep the brownstone from going into default. But we've had to cut our lifestyle down to the bare bone." "That sounds like a very responsible, mature step forward," I replied gently. He fell silent for a long moment, the heavy breathing on the line revealing his internal struggle. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, Could you just loan us $10,000, just enough to bridge the gap for the private school tuition this quarter?" I closed my eyes tightly. The old version of me, the mother who spent decades fixing every mistake, shielding her child from pain, and sacrificing her own comfort, felt a faint, familiar pull deep in her chest. But the new woman, the woman sitting in a sunlit historic townhome that she owned outright, free and clear, knew the truth. Paying a ransom never earns you love, it simply finances the next demand. "No, David," I said firmly, my voice unwavering, "I cannot do that." He let out a long, ragged sigh of complete surrender. "Right, I figured you'd say that, can I? Can I at least bring the boys down to Philadelphia to see you this weekend?" I smiled softly, looking out the tall glass windows at the cobblestone street below. I would love nothing more than to spend time with my grandsons, I told him warmly. You may drop them off at noon on Saturday, but you and Sarah will be waiting in the car outside. You are not invited inside my home. He didn't argue, he didn't demand. He simply whispered, "Okay, Mom," and hung up the phone. When my grandsons visit me now, their laughter fills the tall, historic rooms of my townhome. They play in my garden, and we bake fresh pastries together in my sunlit kitchen. And when the sun begins to set, my son waits outside in his modest sedan on the quiet street, staring up at the illuminated windows of the home he can never enter. He learned the hardest lesson a child can learn. When you treat a human being like a line item on a spreadsheet, you shouldn't be surprised when they finally close the account.